But I will be talking about extracting data and how organisations do that. And our belief really is that it's all about people and not the data. If anyone does want to talk about bias in AI, happy to talk about that in the break. So, like John said, I'm the managing director of JCURV. And JCURV, we're a management consultancy, really supporting organisations. Our mission is to increase the agility of the UK. Now, in the digital world that we're living in today, I guess we see that there's more and more data available to organisations. And actually, so many are now saying, well, data and analytics are actually our core competitive advantage. Yet SAP completed a survey last year where they said that 86% of organisations are saying that there's more value to be taken out of data, and 74% of those organisations are saying it's too complicated to actually extract that value from data. So how do we actually respond to that? It makes rather bleak reading when all of us in this room get our passion from actually doing this in our day jobs. And so, like I said earlier, from a JCURV perspective, we truly believe that it's actually about people and not data, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So these are just some of the clients that we're working with. So we span retail, banking, FS, all the way up to BAE Systems, which is more on the defence side of the world. So when we go into an organisation and think about, okay, so where are they in their analytical capability, we try and assess, where they are based on, what we see as a maturity curve of kind of data and analytics maturity. And we typically find that, organisations kind of fit across one of these areas. You can be reactive, and reactive is where, they have got a data and analytics team, but they're actually just responding and firefighting to questions that, management or other teams may have. Can you tell me about this? Can you tell me about that? And they're pretty good at, looking at the MI and responding to those questions, but is that truly creating a competitive advantage for that company? Kind of moving up the curve, you go on to proactive. This is where the team are trying to add value back to the organisation, saying, look, I can build you some algorithms, I can use machine learning, AI, or even creating some regression models to then help and say, well, look, I think I can solve some of the problems through data. But the challenge that these teams and companies have is that they're still being impeded by, manual work, lack of automation, and that even though they want to be proactive and help the organisation, there's still too much that's drowning them in terms of the basics. Moving on then, you get to strategic capability, which is where it has actually started to add competitive advantage to the organisation. They are building the cool algorithms, using data science and operations research to help solve some of these problems. But again, it's great that they're doing it and it's all based on business outcomes, but they haven't gone truly predictive, which is where, you have got real-time analytics happening, where you then embed it into, the strategies, and that they're going live, having positive customer impact almost every single minute, every single day. Now, I just want you to reflect a little bit on, your organisation and where, you are and, where you think you are on this maturity curve, but who, and try and be as honest as you want to be, but who thinks they're kind of towards the end of that in that reactive, proactive kind of state? Any hands go up? Couple? Who thinks they're more in the middle? Some? Who's at utopia and truly predictive? Any hands? So it just shows, I guess it confirms really those stats that I talked about earlier, that 86% of companies are saying that, there's more to be extracted from this. And there was a recent survey a few weeks ago where it was saying that 40% of analysts' time are actually spent on mundane data prepping. So, if you could refer to, what Philip just talked about and, some of the cool stuff you can do with data and analytics, we're far away from that in reality, which is kind of the sad part of it. Now, from our experience, we've seen that as organisations go up this maturity curve, you can add at least 15% top-line income growth to your business. So that is the business case or the case for change of why it's really important that, I guess, we as an industry and representatives of our companies really try and solve this. So we're often asked, okay, so that sounds great, but how do we actually then start moving up this maturity curve? We are being ground down by, lack of automation. We've got the people, they've got great degrees, but how do we actually go about doing it? So from our perspective, we think there are kind of 4 cornerstones to actually creating a really effective analytics team. And we call this data agility. So the first cornerstone is actually around behaviours and culture. Now, some of you are probably thinking, well, that's not data. Why do we start there? So what do we mean by it? Really, we're saying, try and get data to be at the heart of decisions. It's actually turning insight into action and making sure that, we're translating it back to business outcomes. What is it we're trying to solve for? And that kind of really starts to change the culture. The second part of kind of what we call the data agility diamond is all about people. It's actually making sure that, it's all about us. Making sure that we've got a curious mindset, we're being commercial. We actually have this kind of what we call bias for action. It's actually turning that insight into action. What's the so what? But, always seeing it through to the end and not being happy with just, I've made an amazing model and, my job is done here. Then moving on through methodology. So this is around, that whole test and learn approach, that fail kind of fast, get the learnings and actually move on. And actually, this is kind of one of my favourites. When you start thinking about, creating algorithms and really trying to come up with things that are going to create, world-class advantage for the organisations, is turning big problems and big complex problems, thinking about unstructured, structured data, or what we call big data, but turning it small and actually breaking that down and saying, well, how can I simplify the challenge and actually deliver in increments? And I'll give you some examples of that a bit later on. And then the final one is data capability or technology. So it's making sure that, of course, we've got effective data lakes, we've got good governance and good quality on the data, but actually, in our kind of view, we have that towards the end. And what we typically find when we go and work with organisations is that they almost start with step 4 of, focusing on the technology and the data capability, and then move on through to methodology, people. They may finally get there, and then think about the culture. And so actually, kind of our view is that you've got to turn it on its head and actually start the other way around. And I'll show you some examples of, the benefits of what's been delivered kind of using this approach. So let's just think about how organisations kind of deal with change and where we as analysts kind of sit within that system. So, someone in the organisation will have a bright idea. It could be, creating a new product or a service for our customers. And truly, what we're trying to do here with that idea is think about how am I going to add value back to the business and monetise it. That's what it's all about. And so with this bright idea, it's handed off to the blue team, who may be marketing, and then it goes on to the yellow team, which may be, some of the analysts saying, give me some insight. And then it goes to the black team to say, well, can you now start turning some of this into requirements? And then, suddenly the green team get it. And it's truly like a relay. It's a baton along the way. And then, it might hit the data science team, and then they start building models to try and, really solve this problem. And then finally, something goes live as a solution. Does this kind of resonate with anyone? Do we live in this world? Yeah, a few nods around the room. And so, what happens there is that, you've got, as all these handoffs are happening, you've got different leadership teams that are responsible for these teams. And, in this very siloed environment, each of these leadership teams, have got a slightly different perspective on how to solve the problem. And so what might happen is, by the time you've actually got your final solution, it may be very different to the original idea as well. And of course, time has just gone through where, since you had the idea, the whole landscape, the competitive landscape may have changed as well. So there's multiple problems that are happening here. And so if you're the CFO, for instance, you're looking at this and thinking, well, while all this relay has been going on across the organisation, you've invested in time, you've invested money, and actually, finally, when this product or service goes live at the end, maybe it's going to monetize itself. But normally, I think 9 times out of 10, the CFO is pretty disappointed because they're saying, well, I've overinvested, and actually the business case that we spent months and months building earlier on hasn't quite come true. So unhappy CFO. Now, this is a real-life example. So we were working with a credit card business, and they launched a product, a new product out to the market. And they kind of said, well, actually, we haven't quite got this right because we've got the budget to invest in these products, but actually, it's just taking us too long to get them out the door. What's going wrong? We just can't figure it out. So we did a bit of a diagnostic to say, well, what's actually happening? So what is that whole treacle of the relay actually doing to an organisation? So our first insight was actually they spent 3 months out of a total of 18 months actually kind of focusing on the wrong thing. They didn't have the customer insight. They were building features to this credit card product that actually weren't aligned to what the customers wanted. And it was just that lack of insight. Even though they had data analytics teams on it, it just wasn't aligned to what they were aiming to do. They then had this lack of ownership. So as it was going through, the blue team and the green team and the yellow team, they had different leadership teams, but there was no one overall owner. And that then, obviously leads to different perspectives and different ways to solve problems. Now, this one's awful because as managers, you think, yeah, I'm really good at making decisions, but, in this case, they weren't. They actually spent 1.5 months out of an 18-month process waiting for decisions to happen as those handoffs were going on. Steering group presentations. So who goes to steering groups in this room? Anyone? They'd actually spent a month in total producing steering group materials. So they were producing decks of 20 to 50 pages long. And again, it was all comfort for management to think, yeah, all this data's here. Here's how my algorithms have been built. But actually, in the end, a bit of a waste of time. Handoffs across silos, team working. So this is truly where it was happening, of actually getting the work done. Now, what happened here was that, yes, it took 6 months, but it was because the teams were part-time working. They had many other priorities, and they just weren't getting to the end of the tasks because it was always fighting on, some emergency issues versus, these strategic priorities. There just wasn't that goal in the organisation. A few challenges geographically. And then finally, in total, out of an 18-month process, it was only 3.5 months that were used on value-adding delivery against this product. So, it's quite shocking, really, that the cost of delay here was 14.5 months. Now, the business case for this product was £5 million a year, but actually they'd already wasted almost 6 million of that profit on just going through almost bureaucracy bingo here, isn't it? Of steering committees, governance, and the rest of it. And so, that's kind of why we've really got to think about, how we're working to solve some of these challenges. Does that resonate with anyone? And what happens from this? You've got an unhappy team. Yes, this company had the budget, to invest in new products, but, the marketing teams, the data analytics teams, we were totally unhappy. They'd built regression models or, underwriting models for this, or targeting models for this credit card product, but actually by the time it went live, some of it was already outdated because there were new data sources out there, or, the landscape had changed and another competitor had gone live with that product. So how do we respond? So going back to that data agility diamond, we had agile ways of working as part of the methodology, and we strongly believe in this is the way that we need to be working going forwards. And it's all about having cross-discipline and cross-functional teams. And, this is almost an example makeup of, what an agile team is, but you've got the product owner, you've got the customer, you've got your operational researchers in there, your data scientists, you've got IT, you've got the end-to-end group of people that are actually going to make this thing happen. And it's really important, again, as analysts, that you think, yes, we're at the core and we're at the heart of all the insight, but without the people that are going to enable some of this to happen, it's just information. You only turn it into action for customers is when it's actually been executed and implemented. So having these cross-functional discipline teams are really, really important. Now, we believe also that it's got to be 100% focused. For this organisation, going back to the credit card, they wanted to innovate. They had the budget to create new products, but yet they were doing multiple things. And so actually it's better to focus on, one thing really well than trying to do 20 not so well. Being co-located, changing the way that we communicate with each other and breaking down those barriers, being in one place, we've seen huge advantages of that. And then the final one is being empowered. The people that are in this Scrum team are the ones that are closest to, what's actually happening and how to solve some of the problems. And it really changes our role as leaders in what we're there to do. As much as we think we know all the answers and got all the solutions for every problem out there, actually our role is to think about how do you start breaking down some of the barriers and enable the teams to just move forward. And, we've got some great examples where, someone's been waiting for a governance forum to happen in, 6 weeks' time. And actually that leader's then just, either rung them or dropped them an email and saying, look, I need this budget signed off now. Can we just move ahead? And it really changes the way and the speed of delivery to enable the teams to then just move and progress. And so what happens? Let's go back to this diagram. So how does the CFO then see the world going forwards? In this miserable world where, finally you may make some money to the business later on and release the value back to the customer, you then start to see this. The Agile teams are then delivering in increments over time. And actually, no longer are we living with that risk in our organisations that, it's going to be, the value case will be delivered in 3-4 years' time because it's constantly iterating over time. And, we generally work with our clients on 2-week sprints. So every 2 weeks, we're delivering value back to the customer. And how do we do that? So we create a vision. We refine the backlog and say, how do you break down some of this complexity? You then constantly keep iterating. And then, making sure that you're delivering, you're reviewing with stakeholders, so you're not taking out governance out of this process, but it's a different type of review. You're updating on progress, you're celebrating, but then saying, well, this is where we need your help. And then you're also doing these retrospectives of thinking what's worked well, what hasn't. Some of the examples that come out in retrospectives is maybe we need to add a few more team members in because we haven't got all the capability here. Or it can just be, do you know what, we haven't celebrated enough this week and I'm feeling a bit low. There's a number of things that could be happening here. So I want to go through kind of a bit of a real-life example that we lived with one of our clients, and this was Sainsbury's. So their awesome statement related to kind of payments and the in-store experience that they wanted to create. So it was, as a customer, I can pay anywhere, anyhow, anytime. Sounds pretty big in terms of what they wanted to achieve. And if you think about, your own experiences when you go into Sainsbury's, you've got the conveyor belts, you've got people, you've got your trolley, you need to unload and then reload. This is kind of the problem they were trying to solve, to say, I want to make that better. So, what they did is they built that cross-functional team. They made sure they'd got the analytics team, the marketing team, the people that were in store, but also health and safety. Because, again, this was in-store experience for their customers. It was a real important dimension that they needed to think about. And within 30 days, so they didn't go through planning and think about months and months of how am I going to solve this problem and, let's build lots of algorithms to help us figure out, that in-store experience. But within 30 days, they went live in-store as a pilot. And this is what they launched, is scanners. They reduced the implementation cost by 50%, and they tripled the speed in which of deployment in store. Now, most importantly, on the 31-day timescale, they were then getting the data on how customers were responding to this kit in store. So they knew then how many people were using it, how they were using it, how long did it take, how much time were they actually saving on that in-store experience. So again, go back to how we're operating historically, where you're passing it on to the blue team and the yellow team. This is truly a game changer in how they were working, but it gave them the data to then start analysing to say, how do we now start getting better? Within 90 days, so within 1 quarter, they went live with version 2. where they actually created, the scanners at the till so the customer could actually just do it themselves. They thought, okay, maybe this is a better way of doing it rather than the scanners, with each individual customer. They improved the transaction speed, by 3 steps in the process, which is a huge cost reduction program. But at the same time, they managed to increase the NPS of customers, the Net Promoter Score, by 5%. So customers liked it. And so again, it was just amazing that they had this learning within 90 days, but also for the data scientists then have all this data to then say, how do we go even a step further and keep improving? And so this is where the story kind of has got to now. Within a year, so 360 days, they launched the first cashless supermarket store in the UK, and it was in the FT a couple of weeks ago, where they've now designed an app. You can actually go in and you don't need any money at all to get into the store, get out of the store, with your kind of goods and products that you wanted to buy. This is just a great example of where, working in this approach of agile ways of working, data agility and getting those cross-functional teams in place just shows the value of what can be delivered. And actually the outcome here was that the analytical teams were so happy because, all of their models and the algorithms that they'd created had suddenly gone into practice. And I know the Queen was there on the celebration of, Sainsbury's recent birthday. They were part of it. What does that make you feel like when you're one of those people that have built those algorithms? Here's another example, so kind of slightly different, but this guy is called Shrinash. And he had been working in one of our clients for 10 years in the BI team. And his responsibility within the BI team was to try and automate a really critical report. And this was all about sales and waste for a retailer. And, he'd been there 10 years trying to automate it, plugging away. He was working on, refining attributes or variables, looking at the definitions. He was trying to think about visualization. He'd never, ever met the customer who was actually using the report on the other side, which were in finance. And then even when the customer had some feedback, it would come back through that chain of a bit of a relay. So it would either be second or third hand, and that would have taken 2 to 3 weeks since that change in the report had gone live. So pretty miserable. So, this poor guy was plugging away. On the other side, finance team, these are really clever people. They were management accountants. And, they had a job to do. They needed to understand the sales and the waste reports for the retailer, because otherwise they wouldn't know, okay, how do we stock that day? Where do we put our deliveries? And so they were totally demotivated. They were saying in their colleague engagement survey that they didn't have the tools to do their job. So this was really basic level stuff. So then what happened? Our client said, we can't carry on this way anymore. I mean, it's just not sustainable. 10 years of this person's time and life, it's a long time to work on one report. I'm not sure, I would have had the resilience to keep going on that journey. And so we then created an Agile team to, help try and automate this report. We got the customers in the room and actually, started to really think about what are the requirements, what do you actually need from these reports, and how do you want it visualized? And does it need to come in at 5 a.m, or, is there other requirements? So those were refined. Within 10 weeks, that report has now been fully automated. It runs at 5 a.m. each morning without any human intervention. So that 10-year piece of work was able to get solved in 10 weeks. And then again, this is just great data capability that was built in the organization by working in a different way. Slightly different example. So this one's from the insurance sector. Now, it was all kind of linked to motor insurance and kind of links in a little bit to what Philip was talking about in his previous presentation. So in the insurance sector, obviously the whole business is built on claims rates, what are the actual claims versus, what you're forecasting. And it's the thin science of getting that right that means that you make money or lose money. So our client here, had this issue of where they needed to update their forecasting models every single month. And what was happening is that the code took 40 hours to run. And, it was 100% failure rate on that code because, something would happen, it would fall over, maybe you ran out of server space or something else like that. It then took them 7 days to manipulate the data to then put it into a presentation pack to show the management. It took 10 manual steps to get there. And actually, from this process, the whole reason why they had this process is to then say, well, what are the insights? What's actually happening? And how can we refine our models to improve them? They just had no idea. And our client had actually spent 2 years trying to fix this and actually get the whole process working better. But they had no idea. And we met the MD for, the kind of the motor world, and he said, I've got no idea what the issue is, but I just know it can't be this hard and I need it solved. So our first step was to then say, let's just map out the process and see what's happening. It was a total insight for them that there were 10 kind of handoffs in this process, and actually how many times data was manually being manipulated to then put it into a system or into an algorithm in a certain format. It just wasn't value adding at all. So where this ended was that within 44 kind of working days, so again, just put that into your mind of what have you done in the last 6 weeks when they'd been trying to solve this for 2 years. We've got the process down now by into 2 steps. The whole end-to-end process takes 1 hour to actually get into the pack that we need, and the code takes 12 hours to run. And what we did with that code is to say, well, what is it actually trying to do? Now let's try and simplify it in steps and make sure that it works end to end. So from 40 hours down to 12 hours. And, one of my kind of highlights is that actually engagement levels for the people that were working on this went up by 40%. And, think about it from a business perspective. Instead of just having, 2 hours to try and get some insight before a meeting where someone's presenting it, we've actually turned it into every month they've got 30 days to actually create the value add and say, well, what is the data saying and how can I turn that into actionable insights? So kind of through this way of working, what we've kind of achieved over time is that, with this data agility approach, we can use it to add value from a revenue perspective, like the tills, or, generating new products. You can think about, cost reduction and automation, but you can also think, and it works in terms of data capability as well, and actually really building some of the things that are potentially grinding us down, or new technologies to then enable us to be truly predictive. So over the last 4 years as JCURV, we've helped our clients kind of unlock 1.6 billion back into the UK economy by releasing that through data, analytics, and just bringing those teams together to help solve these problems. 100% of our clients are now using Agile ways of working, even beyond when we've left. So they're actually using it, but have expanded it as well, because they've actually seen the business case of what this has given them. And then we've trained over 5,000 people in Agile ways of working. So it really is kind of the way to start thinking differently in how you truly unlock the value of data. So like I said, our true belief is that it's all about people, not data. Thank you.